Welcome to Spatial Signals. It's a podcast about remote sensing and geospatial science, but more importantly, the people behind it. I'm your co-host, Dr. Brad Shellito, and with me is your other co-host, coming to us from his pirate radio station, narrowly tucked behind the Tree of Utah sculpture at the Bonneville Salt Flats, Mr. Chris McGinty. How is Utah treating you today, Chris?
It's fantastic, Brad. How's Ohio today?
It is a great day in Ohio, and that is always a great thing to have.
Oh, yes. Yep. Well, that's great. So you ready for today?
Oh, I am absolutely ready for today. This is going to be a special treat here today for everyone.
All right, let's hear about it.
Well, for those of you just joining us, this podcast is sponsored by AmericaView, the National Geospatial and Remote Sensing Network, which is dedicated to empowering Earth observation education. Now, AmericaView has been around since 2003 and has grown from a program just in the state of Ohio to a network of programs across the U.S. that work with remote sensing GIS and geospatial technologies in all forms of outreach, research, and education. But today we have a very special episode because this is the first episode of a new sub-series that we have here on Spatial Signals that we're calling The Squared Circle, in which we have a whole group of guests on to wrestle with a particular topic. And here in round one of The Squared Circle, today we're going to be grappling with Landsat Next, the whole new satellite system that is on the way that's going to be doing all kinds of cool things and delivering all kinds of new types of data to work with. But in order to get into things, I'm going to throw things back to Chris for a little background on today's match.
Thanks, Brad. Well, I think it's going to be a really interesting, a lot of fun to be able to have this opportunity to talk about Landsat Next. We've been talking about Landsat Next as the continuation of the Landsat program and missions for a few years now. And we're still making progress on getting Landsat Next up and flying. But just a little bit of background and why Landsat Next is so important and why we're going to have this conversation today. But, starting in 1972 when USGS and NASA came together after much discussion and launched ERTS-1, kind of set the precedent for remote sensing of the surface of the Earth and Earth observation. And since 1972 and that launch of the initial satellite, we've had 9 satellites go up. All but one have been incredibly successful, and we're now at Landsat 9. And through the time that these satellite missions have been flying, we've had a lot of different technology advancements. There's been advancements to satellite buses, the vehicles that carry the sensors. There's been advancements to the sensors to the kind of data that we can collect, the bit depth, the resolution, and how quickly we can process that data and make it all available for folks to use. But some of the things, Brad, that I think are important to point out while we're kind of going into this Landsat Next discussion is, one, the satellites, it has been, there's design parameters on the table. There has been money that's been allocated by Congress to march down this road. We're thinking of a launch time in 2031, 2032, if all goes well. And so it's a really important component because one of the things that has been done over the past number of years is there's been an annual economic valuation of the Landsat program. And the most recent program shows that, the Landsat program itself touches almost all sectors of the economy. And it also brings in about $25 billion to the economy each year. And so that's the current Landsat, and that's going back in time and, adjusting for different inflation factors. But at the same time, what we're looking at into the future with Landsat Next is something that adds even more to the economy. So another 30% on top of that. So it's an incredibly beneficial program that the U.S. government has founded, flown, and continued to sustain over the years. And a couple of different things that we're looking at with Landsat Next is just those continual technological improvements. One of those is an improved return interval for when a sensor will cover the surface of the Earth. And that's because they're looking at flying not just one satellite in this mission, but 3. And so these are what we're calling the superspectral triplets. And the superspectral triplets really lends itself to better spectral resolution, better return interval, just better imagery across the board. So addressing all these different parts of the economy, Landsat Next is going to take that to the next level. So it's an incredible, continuation of the Landsat program, and it's not just continuity, Brad. It's continuity through evolution, and so we're seeing what we've had up until Landsat 9, which has been this slow evolution of the platform, and now kind of this leap forward to where we would have a much better return interval. We'd be able to get better data. We'd be able to match with some of our European partners in what they're already collecting, like with Sentinel and some of the other missions. So that hopefully will set the stage for the discussion we're going to have today, because it's not just going to allow us to do what we've been doing, but it's allow us to do that and go further, Brad.
Yeah, because Landsat 8 was great. And Landsat 9 was its cloned twin brother. And now Landsat Next is going to be the whole new evolution of everything that we can do through this 50 plus years worth of Landsat data.
Right. Yeah, and I think it also behooves us to mention that archive is free. All the data that comes off the sensors today will be available later today for download by anyone who wants to download it. So that gets processed through the AROS data center and served out via USGS websites. And you're right, Brad. I mean, this is this evolution of data is incredibly important.
Well, you didn't come here to listen to Chris and I talk. You came here for a wrestling match. And your full card for round 1 today is 4 guests who all have extensive experience utilizing all types of things with satellite imagery. First off is Dr. Doug Ramsey, who's coming to us from the Department of Wildlife Resources at Utah State University. Thanks for coming here today, Doug.
Hi, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Second is Dr. Dana Peterson, coming to us from the Kansas Biological Survey and Center for Ecological Research at the University of Kansas. Thanks for coming here today, Dana.
I appreciate the invite. Thanks, Brad.
Third is Dr. Bruce Millett, coming to us from the Department of Geography and Geospatial Sciences at South Dakota State University.
Thanks, Brad.
And last but not least, friend of the show and occasional co-host, Dr. Aaron Maxwell, coming to us from the Department of Geology and Geography at West Virginia University.
Thanks, Brad and Chris.
Well, thank you all for coming here today to grapple with the issues. And the first thing we wanted to talk about for all of you is, what are you most looking forward to with Landsat Next? Chris has talked about how this is the whole new evolution, whole bunch of new stuff. What are you guys most looking forward to with this?
Well, that's kind of a hard question to answer on my part. It's such a much improved sensor from the previous ones that it's a hard, all the good things that are in it, hard to pick the best one. For my part, I would pick the temporal resolution, the repeat interval of the sensor. That for somebody who likes to monitor landscapes and see how they change, that is a massive leap forward.
Yeah, because we're so used to Landsat having a 16-day interval. It flies over top of Utah State. Doug goes out and waves at it, and 16 days later, barring any cloud cover, it comes back again. So how's this? What kind of better temporal resolution are we getting out of this, Doug?
Well, it looks like it's going to be every 3 days or so on average,
right?
Or better than that. I know that the current sensors, Landsat 8 and 9, will give you an 8-day repeat, the two of them together. Mm-hmm. If you merge that with Sentinel, the European sensor, then that drops it down to just a couple of days. And now with Landsat Next, it's going to be significantly more. We probably get imagery every day from the suite of sensors that we have up there.
Right, yeah, because Landsat Next doesn't just stand by itself. We got so many other sensors up there to work with, right, too. But even just by itself, we're going to be getting Landsat Next solely imagery just every couple days instead of waiting every 16 days for it to come on back.
Yeah, and that's very cool, because the every 16-day repeat isn't bad for the kind of work I do, but then you have to factor in clouds. And clouds tend to block everything that we want to see on the ground. So that kind of repeat interval is going to completely free us of the curse, I guess you could say, of clouds, unless you are into clouds and like to study them. But so the repeat interval is going to really mitigate that problem.
And I think one thing that's worth mentioning too is it aligns a lot better with the Sentinel multispectral instrument, but which there's 2 of those, so it's easier to combine the data with the Sentinel data, which makes the temporal component, I think, even more compelling.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's 5 of the bands that are out of the 26 for Landsat Next will be synergistic with Sentinel, and I think that's going to be revolutionary for a lot of people from the temporal aspect, like Doug mentioned. But I'd also like to comment, I just think the continuation of Landsat and how it's always been the gold standard, I think having that data available and having the long-term monitoring capabilities that we're moving forward with, like I know that there's some heritage bands or legacy bands that will remain on Landsat. I think that's really important so we can do some multi-temporal analysis.
And I'd like to add another thing, as far as one of the things I'm looking for to is going to be the addition of those. So we'll have a total of 26 bands on there. And for the work that I do with precision agriculture, particularly in the red edge bands, that's going to be a huge improvement.
Yeah, we're so used to the usual, handful of multispectral bands, 7 or 10, and then a thermal band. And then, Sentinel keeps bringing all these other good toys, like Bruce mentioned, a Red Edge and things. And now all of a sudden, Landsat Next is going to give us this whole suite of all, more bands than we know what to do with in order to work with these kinds of things. But y'all have mentioned spectral data. You've mentioned temporal. This whole Landsat Next suite is going to have better spatial data. It's going to have better, not just spectral, but it's going to have better radiometric, better temporal. How is all this stuff and all these new toys really going to impact your work and your research, having all of this new stuff at your disposal?
Well, I think the calibration issue is going to be amazing. We all want to know exactly what the amount of energy coming off the surface of the Earth so that we can record it. And more importantly, so we can track it over time so that when we get a response today, it will be comparable to a response tomorrow. And that calibration, that radiometric fidelity and the spectral fidelity is going to go a long ways to getting us to the point where we can look at the spectral reflectance of surface cover and be able to accurately model that across time.
One thing that people have been doing over the last few years to try to improve the interoperability between Landsat and Sentinel-2 data, or to actually harmonize them. So there's the harmonized Landsat Sentinel products, and that's not super straightforward since they are not exactly the same bands and they don't have the same spatial resolution. So I think that having a sensor that's more aligned with Sentinel-2 is going to make it a lot easier to do change analysis across those two different platforms.
So I'm interested, speaking about the HLS data, Aaron, and kind of going to you, Dana. How do you, you've used we've had the opportunity to talk to you a lot before, and talking about your Sentinel Green report, and you guys have used Sentinel for many years. I'm interested to know if what Aaron's talking about, and some of these more. We can look at Landsat Next as kind of boosting that spectral resolution and that spatial resolution. It's something that you guys are going to be able to use in your Sentinel Green report, or look at using. Or are you going to kind of stick with the process that you have?
Well, I guess it kind of depends. I'm assuming that Landsat Next data will be available through Google Earth Engine. And if so, then we would keep the web mapping application that leverages Google Earth Engine the same, and we could easily harness and integrate Landsat with the Sentinel data, like Aaron had mentioned. It'll be much easier to integrate the two. So I think we'll be able to improve the temporal compositing that we do of vegetation indexes that would allow almost near real-time monitoring. And then outside of that, though, I'm really excited about some of the new bands that are going to be available. In Kansas, a lot of our drinking water is from federal reservoirs, and we have harmful algal blooms that affect water quality. And so I think there's band 6 and 7 that we're going to be able to leverage and really start looking at how can we identify these harmful algal blooms in a timely fashion. And then there's some additional bands too that I think are going to lend opportunity to do some more invasive species mapping across Kansas. We have some some grassland species that have been really difficult to map with the current sensors that are out there. But I think this improved spectral resolution is going to be a potential game changer.
I think that one thing that's really exciting is this is really a whole new sensor, and there's going to be applications that we actually have no idea about right now. So I think people are going to find new uses for Landsat data just based on this, change in the system. So I think that it really opens the door to some things we're not even thinking about.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I'm really interested in well, I got a couple of questions. I guess I want to push one towards Bruce about precision ag, and while Landsat as it stands is rather coarse, we're going to see some scales of magnitude of improvement with Landsat Next, and how can you see using some of that improved spatial resolution, Bruce, and kind of combining that with some of the UAS data that you collect regularly to help support your decision making?
Yeah, sure. I think that we'll see more and more data fusion going on between Landsat and UAS data collected out there. One of the areas of improvement that I can see out there is at the field level. When we go down to a 10-meter resolution with Landsat, that's going to be a big game changer when it comes to precision agriculture out there, because we'll be able to even improve it down further with the UAS data. And then we can also pick up some subtle changes out there with our land cover, any kind of problems that we may run into out there, things dealing with let's say yield productions. If we see vegetation that may be under stress, we'll be able to detect that sooner because of the return time improvements, pick it up earlier, and be able to do something, some kind of prescribed prescription for improving that out there in the field, getting the information to our farmers out there and other stakeholders that may need this data out there. I just see a lot of improvements, and particularly what I was kind of hinting at earlier was the 3 red edge bands. And then there's also going to be an expanded shortwave infrared bands up there as well. And so with those 3 red edge bands, we'll be able to do a lot of the monitoring for the plants, seeing what their health is out there. And then with the shortwave infrared, we'll be able to look at better detections out there with the soils. And we can basically kind of combine this soil information with the health of the plants out there.
That's really cool. And I think that's going to go a long ways towards, supporting, all sorts of crop mapping. And I look forward to seeing kind of what they can do with, like you said, some of these disease detection and looking at different things like crop residue and even soil moisture content. And I think that's one thing I wanted to ask Doug. You led right into it, Bruce. Is Doug, a lot of the work that you've done in arid environments kind of points to things like NDVI and other things. But now we're seeing at least 4 SWIR bands, shortwave infrared bands, those red edge bands. But those SWIR bands can be used to look at soil moisture and fire scar detection. And I'm kind of interested in how you think that'll impact like mapping invasives like cheatgrass, Bromus tectorum, or other things across some of these more arid environments that we tend to work in out here in the West.
Yeah. For the cheatgrass issue, the invasive species, and merged with the soil moisture, we all want to know what causes cheatgrass to really bloom. We kind of have a handle on it to determine whether a year is going to have a bumper crop of cheatgrass, where there's a lot of cheatgrass out there, or just a little bit, depending on the water year. Soil moisture is going to be or soil moisture mapping will be a critical part of that. Also, the fire mapping, we have that capability already to map the actual fire scar and look at what's burning, currently burning, what's not. So the temporal resolution of Landsat Next is going to really, really improve that capability to see where the active fires are. But I think more importantly, the extra spectral bands, especially in the red edge and in the SWIR, will help us look at how the land is recovering post-fire, and how the vegetation is coming back, whether it's coming back as invasive weeds or the natives are coming back. That's going to be critical, especially for soil stability and soil health and basic ecosystem health.
I'd say, like here in the East, some of the invasives we worry about, they can somewhat be detected just based on their phenology changes in the fall. So for example, we have like the tree of heaven, which is a pretty big deal invasive around here and has yellow flowers. So, a lot of people have been looking at trying to detect those the yellow signal during the flowering period. So having like higher spatial, or having those yellow orange bands might be helpful there, but also having the increased temporal resolution that allows you to potentially capture the flowering period, even with cloud cover. I think is actually very useful for our purposes, even in the East.
I think that's a really good point, Aaron. And something else I wanted to ask you, and certainly anybody else who wants to chime in, but you've had a lot of experience with a lot of different data sources. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the improved thermal bands. So now we're going to have 5 thermal bands that are at 60 meters instead of what we've had at 100 meters or roughly thereabouts in the past. Do you see in what you've done and what others are doing how that's going to be used and how those improved thermal bands are going to be important?
Yeah, I mean, some might need to correct me on this, but yeah, I believe there were some issues with the thermal bands on Landsat 8, or at least one of them, right? They
Right.
had some artifacts, and it seems like the ones on 9 are a little more stable, but I don't work with those a lot, to be honest. But I think that for things like fire, urban heat island studies, I think that the increased number of thermal bands and the increased spatial resolution, and then hopefully if everything launches, the just improved stability of those bands are going to be invaluable.
Yeah, I agree, and you're right about Landsat 8 and 9 was a slightly improved set of thermal bands, but I think this step into 60 meter 5 different bands is going to be pretty important for those things that you just said. Dana, kind of thinking along those lines and some of the things that that you've done, we've talked to you about, and some of the folks in states around you is mapping things like the eastern red cedar and some of these encroachments. Do you think that having this higher resolution data, more bands, you're going to be able to further define that to help land managers go out and identify those places where they can do treatments and they can work through using this data to develop some of these decision-making tools?
I definitely do. We've been somewhat successful using Sentinel imagery to map eastern red cedar. However, I still think we're a little challenged in terms of at what stage can we map red cedar. I know land managers would like to be able to map like saplings, and unfortunately, I don't know that Sentinel has the capability to do that, or even Landsat Next, but we may be able to do like UAS research related to that to see if we can tie some ground reference information to, go up into imagery and be able to map different densities of eastern red cedar. So it's still kind of an unknown, but something that I'm interested in doing because it's such an important topic for the state of Kansas and maintaining our grasslands. And also potentially even looking at other invasive woody species like American plum that really hasn't been explored.
Sure, I think that's incredibly important. Some of the invasives that you have an opportunity to work with certainly different than what we do, but at the same time, not one sensor is going to be the answer to everything, and certainly Landsat Next isn't going to answer every single question that we have out there. But having some of these improved measurements will be fantastic. I'm curious to everybody, and Brad, this includes you because you do your share of teaching, but the data itself is going to be orders of magnitude larger. Now we're still a few years out. Our processing abilities on our desktops are fantastic. The cloud is there, but I'm curious how or if this change in size of data just in general is going to influence how you teach, right? How you bring your students in. Is it all going to be cloud-based? Are you still going to have them go to Earth Explorer and download data and process one image at a time to get that feel for what it takes? I'm interested in how, for all of you, this is gonna affect your teaching and how you introduce people to remote sensing in the future.
And one thing I'll say is I'm hoping that they'll move away from just having a couple different download options to maybe some reduced versions of the data that would make it easier to download and teach with, either resampling it to 30 meters or just maybe including just the 10-meter bands as a download option. Because I actually think this is a legitimate challenge, how to integrate all of this data. My general rule of thumb for a lab, I try to keep the data download under 4 gigs, which still seems like a lot. So anyway, I think this would be difficult to do over a sizable area for a lab. So anyway, I haven't really seen a lot of discussion yet about the different download options that might be available. I'm hoping that they do have some potential scaled back versions that you could download just a subset of bands or a smaller area as opposed to an entire scene or entire. I guess they're switching to the WRS system.
Right. Well, our friends from NASA and USGS will be listening, hopefully. So if they maybe can think about that a little bit as well. But yeah, how about the rest of you?
Well, I know in the Department of Geography at the University of Kansas, we do teach a lot of using Google Earth Engine. So and learning how to process data and create data products using the Sentinel and Landsat archive. But I'm hoping they will also create maybe something similar to the Sentinel Hub EO browser, where you can pick and choose different bands to download. But I don't know what they have in mind or what they're planning to do. It'd be great to learn more about that.
Yeah, I use Copernicus, the Copernicus browser a good bit for Sentinel-2, and I really like the way it's designed. And it's a little bit more flexible, I think, than Earth Explorer in terms of the download options. So I hope that people are thinking about that, because I think that will could greatly improve the user experience.
Bruce, you want to chime in on that at all, or are you?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just kind of looking at, we'll probably have to do some kind of, and Aaron was kind of alluding to this, is, some kind of cloud optimized, form of these files. Maybe it'd be just like a portion of the files in order to download those. And then what Doug was kind of alluding to as well, as far as the technology itself, that a lot of this stuff is going to be up there, in the cloud. And every time we've gone through historically, new versions of things, new sizes of files and stuff like that, we've just been able to adapt to that. There's one other area that I was kind of interested in, and that is to also look at the improvement of some of our analytical tools and our models out there with the data over time. And this includes, dealing with all these new bands that we'll have out there. And then this is going to open up a whole new area for study and research, and then also, how we're going to, incorporate this into our classrooms as well.
Because that's one thing you guys have mentioned about between the size of the images. What I've been hearing, at least anecdotally, that a Landsat 9 image would be 1.5 to 2 gigs, and a Landsat Next scene is going to be 20 gigs, which is going to be a lot to download and wrestle with as opposed to working with on the cloud. But y'all are right. Things adapt, we change. As time's gone on, we keep being able to deal with this stuff. But beyond just the file size and the amount of data that's going to be coming down the pipe, what other challenges do you all see about incorporating Landsat Next or transitioning things, whether from a research standpoint or a teaching standpoint, into your classes?
Well, kind of continuing on with what I was saying earlier is that, updating some of our analytical tools and models, but also building some of our new spectral knowledge with all these different bands that we're going to have out there, and then how to use those band designations, and what are we going to use these for? This could come up with new ideas. For example, maybe we can develop new combinations for crop stress, or something maybe like for chlorophyll detections, or even doing biomass calculations out there in the fields. I think that there's a wide open area to build upon out there in the future.
A lot of our newer algorithms that do like feature extraction or pixel level classification are fairly data hungry. Like all the deep learning based methods, and there's a lot of techniques now where we can learn or build models, or at least kind of initiate models using some learning process that doesn't require any labels, like a semi-supervised or weakly supervised learning process. So I think having these large data sets that are collected on a more frequent basis actually is really timely now with the growth of deep learning, because I think is this level of data volume is what's actually needed to build like foundation models, for example, that are able to ingest this type of data and then be fine-tuned for a specific task that's without it requiring a lot of labels or a lot of ground data to go along with the modeling process.
So I'll comment on the challenges, and this relates to cloud platforms like Google Earth Engine, where there's a memory limit, and so a lot of times our modeling is restricted spatially because of the memory limits for non-paid subscribers for Google Earth Engine. And so I'm curious to see how they're going to handle these larger data sets, and because if they keep limiting the memory, it won't be as beneficial to use that cloud platform. And hopefully there's a workaround or something like that without a paid subscription. So I think that's going to be a challenge because we do leverage Google Earth Engine quite a bit for our web mapping applications at KU.
I think that's fascinating, and one of the things that I would like to ask all of you, again, another question, and that is kind of, taking off of some what Brad has said, but, looking ahead to Landsat Next. So we'd still be some years out. Yes, there's been a $500 million contract for instruments really let already in this case, and hopefully they're going to continue working on it. It's about getting the administration to continue seeing the importance of the positive impact of the economy and the investment of taxpayer dollars. But really, looking forward to Landsat Next, what do you all believe is like the most, I guess, significant, potential to transform your research, policy making, or just general practices within the field? So, Bruce and Danny, you've talked about a couple of these things, but I'm really interested in, what are some of the most significant potential transformations that you'll see, beyond just getting data more often or something that's a little higher resolution, or much higher resolution.
Well, I think that one area, particularly talking about government and things is looking at some policy making, some other things dealing with governance out there, particularly like with data, and then also looking at some of those implications as well, and then looking at also looking at our other stakeholders as well out there in the field. There are people at the local level. I deal with agronomists. I look at people that are doing programming for the stuff that we do out there with precision ag. But a lot of times I'm dealing with the data users out there, and we need to kind of look at how we can use some of the new capabilities, or plan for some of those new capabilities in the next few years, and how we can use this to help support some of our decision making out there.
Yeah, Aaron, I'm interested to get your input on the same thing, because I think you've given this some pretty good thought. But what do you think some of these most significant potentials are for moving into this next phase of the Landsat story?
Yeah, it seems like Landsat, well, at least the earlier iterations were kind of their own thing. I mean, there wasn't a lot that was at the same scale, the same bands and whatnot that Landsat was providing. And then more recently with the Sentinel-2 program from the European Space Agency, there's a kind of a, not really a competitor, but there's some like sister data available, and there's been opportunities to kind of combine those. But with the design of the Landsat Next system, it's clear that they were looking at things like Sentinel-2 and how it would, potentially, compare to that or enhance it in some way. So I think it's exciting that we're seeing our federal government programs trying to actively create sensors that pair well with sensors that are being created by other organizations such as the ESA. So I'm hoping that that'll be a trend that will continue in the future. So for example, the next time that the ESA wants to launch a moderate resolution multispectral sensor, they're going to be looking at Landsat Next and thinking, how can we make our data align well with Landsat Next? I think a lot of this satellite technology, even though it's probably gotten somewhat cheaper with technological advancements, is still expensive to operate and maintain, and then also obviously the data housing and whatnot, all of the outputs that come out of these programs. So I think in the future we're really going to need to think about generating satellite programs that are supported by potentially multiple governments, multiple nations, so that we can have consistent data that's also collected on a fairly regular basis and has a large set of tools that sit behind it. So to me, that's one of the most exciting things about the Landsat Next, is it's clear that it maybe is a step forward in integrating across the moderate resolution satellite platforms that exist across the whole globe, not just with our own government.
Unfortunately, I do see that the ref is about to give us the 3 count and ring the bell here. So I was just going to ask you if everybody had a last call for a last couple of thoughts here about Landsat Next. Doug, how are you feeling about the final wrap up here?
Yeah, I think it's great. If I were to summarize this and cite my hopes for the future, is that Landsat Next stays on schedule. I know there's a question about that. But I don't think there's a question about it eventually being launched because there's so much invested in the Landsat program over the years, and it provides such a great return on the investment that the U.S. makes into it. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing this data, and I might even come out of retirement to play with it.
Sounds good. Dana, what's your final take here? Last call.
Well, I'm really excited about Landsat Next for my research, but also the broader remote sensing and geospatial communities, and some of these programs that are already running, like the Rangeland Analysis Platform, what they're going to be able to do with this data, or NASA's Harvest Consortium. I just think it's going to open so many research opportunities and data product development opportunities. I'm really excited.
Bruce, Last call here at the wrestling match.
Well, there's several things I'm looking forward to with Landsat, and we talked about the spectral improvements and the spatial resolution improvements, temporal resolution improvements, and uh, I would also look forward to some of this enhanced data quality. The more bands and everything that we have out there. And then also the areas for support, particularly like for agriculture, which is what I deal with. But one area we kind of didn't address is, things that happen on a very fast time frame, which would be something like disaster management, dealing with floods or fire or something like that out there. Being able to produce maps and things like that at almost a real-time basis. I'm really looking forward to things like that.
That sounds great. And lastly, go for the pin, Aaron.
Oh, I guess the main thing I'm looking forward to is just the first time I get to see some data from the sensor. It's kind of like Christmas, every time there's a new satellite launched, it goes up, and then you hear all the data is available now on Earth Explorer, whatever the platform happens to be, and to go in there and download my first scene and stack up all the bands and open up in my GIS software and see what it looks like. That's like a very exciting time for me. So I'm looking forward to playing
you're
with
absolutely
it, I
right.
guess.
We've heard so much about this so far. Just waiting to finally get our hands on this here in a couple of years. But thank you so much for joining us, everybody, here for round one of the Squared Circle. We really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us and grapple with what's going on here with Landsat Next. In the show notes, we will be putting links to some places where our listeners can be able to find more information here about Landsat Next and about these things we've been talking about. But also, Chris, where can everybody find more about us online?
Thanks, Brad. Yep, and thanks to everybody for participating. I think there's, we're barely scratching the surface of the many things we could talk about, with respect to Landsat program, Landsat Next, and this idea of the super spectral triplets, which is so critical to the continuation of the mission. But if anybody's interested, certainly you can head on over to Substack and find America View and the Spatial Signals podcast link there. Or over to Podbean, you can find a link directly to the various episodes that have been dropped. But if you're interested in anything about America View, head on over to americaview.org. You can check out all the resources. As we always mention, there's lots of downloadable educational resources there, and on all the standard social media platforms at America View and over at YouTube. Some great content, and in fact, some from the folks on the line today. So thanks, Brad.
And as always, we'd like to thank our editor, Matt Wozniak, for making us sound good, and Matthew Maxwell for our theme music. But we'll be back soon with another episode. So until then, I'm Brad Shellito.
I'm Chris McGinty.
And you keep watching the skies for those spatial signals out there.